My name is Charlene Spretnak, and this panel is on spiritual and religious sources of inspiration and empowerment for women. And yeah, I thought when they told me the title of the panel, what arose in my mind was, do women need to be empowered? And I thought, well, of course, that depends on what kind of culture a woman's born into. Because there are lots of cultures around the world where women are honored. And they're honored in religious ceremonies and also in societal functions. And a lot of these cultures have a sacred creation story that focuses around a goddess or a divine couple. And the connectedness of women as the sacred female connected to the larger cosmological context is a very old perception of cultures. Because we bleed in rhythm with the moon, because we have the ability to grow people out of our bodies, because we have the ability to transform food into milk that makes the next generation possible. So there's been a long association with this embeddedness in the cosmological forces. And many of these cultures, even today, are still matrilocal and matrilineal, with the clan mothers having a very important role. So women who are born into those kinds of cultures past their formative years just organically coming into a place of spiritual and societal empowerment. In contrast, the society I was born into, many decades ago, I've been observing and experiencing it, is somewhat different from this. And I was specifically raised in Columbus, Ohio, but I'm talking about modern Western cultures. And this is specific to one geographic area, but since it has spread at least partially to so many areas of the world, I think it's relevant to understand it. A modern Western culture is informed by two foundational orientations. And the one is what's called the mechanistic worldview. Rather than being embedded in the cosmological unfolding, things are seen as being completely separative and isolate entities or life forms. And things can be in relationship or not, but there's certainly no inherent interrelationship among life forms. And the other orientation that informs modern Western culture, of course, is that they're male-oriented or patriarchal, or they're mainstream cultures, and we know this. And the mechanistic worldview fits very well with male subjectivity because they invented it. And by male subjectivity, I want to clarify, I'm not talking about absolutes, I'm talking about the findings of a wide range of studies of perception, cognition, ways of processing information. There are gender and sex differences which show up through the decades and in different cultures, but of course in different ways in different cultures. So in general, women show up on these kinds of tests as having a more relational mode of perception and cognition in general. So the most important part of a modern Western culture is the political economy. This is seen to be at the center, and everything else just shakes out around it. So all the different sectors, education, medicine, the private business sector, the public sector, government, politics, they all evolved to be in line with the mechanistic worldview. But there are two sectors that have remained deep fonts of relational thinking. And these are religion and art. And religion, of course, is an exploration of the exquisite dynamic interrelatedness of all being, the unitive dimension of all being, and ultimate creativity in the cosmos, which is perceived and expressed in many different ways culturally. And then art explores human and planetary existence in ways that break through the limitations of any language system and cognitive modes of thought that are discursive. So these two sectors are considered quite marginal, pretty far from the political economy, just as women are considered quite marginal in the system. So when the three of them converge as women's spiritual art, a very powerful source of inspiration is formed for women. And this is very important for us if we're working to change this culture or any other culture with some things that could be improved, because the culture does regard us as secondary. And in fact, if women try to conform entirely to mainstream culture, they damage themselves over time. It's very important to find our own inner balance and center. So I want to say, too, there's nothing wrong with male subjectivity in itself. It's just when it's passed off as the obviously right way to think and do things instead of, half of society. Again, general tendencies we're talking about. So I think in this situation where it is an uphill struggle for women in a culture like this, it's very important to cultivate a center that will protect her and inspire her and empower her. And I think that this combination, women's spiritual art, is really our mana. Whether it's historical images, figurines from the Neolithic era, prehistoric, even back to the Upper Paleolithic, it reminds us we're in a long lineage of people who honored the sacred female. And then with regard to contemporary artists, painting, sculpture, women's installation art, music, literary arts, dance, all these are also sources of this protected, I think, conversion of relational thinking, which is otherwise not honored in the culture, not very available in the culture. So I wanted to tell you about a very terrific source of this. And I'm going to close with this. It's just that I would like you to know about this book that is full of these examples of women's spiritual art that's incredibly empowering. It's actually an exhibition catalog from an exhibition 3 years ago, but it's still in print. I checked online. And it was an international exhibition that was jointly put together by the Museum of Modern Art in Mexico and the Los Angeles County Museum. And it's called In Wonderland, The Adventures of Surrealist Art by Mexican and North American women, something like that, In Wonderland. And it's really amazing because these women didn't use the label surrealist for their own art, but all of them, and they're very different, it goes over 4 decades, were very interested in exploring their authentic spiritual experience without being limited to a particular tradition. It's a very unusual gathering of that kind of deep, free exploration, and then since they were all talented artists, their expression of it. So I want to tell you, just as an example, about two of the artists in that book, Leonora Carrington and Remedios Varo. I knew about them for years, their work, but I learned a lot more recently when I was researching my last book, The Spiritual Dimension of Modern Art. And what I learned was that these two women, they met in Paris in the late 30s. They were part of the group of second-generation surrealist painters. And that scene was very much controlled by André Breton, who was very patriarchal. So after the war, after World War II, they each had moved 5,000 miles away from that to Mexico City. And there they discovered that they had all the elements they needed to create a new kind of art, with women at the center, not as an object, as in the men's surrealist paintings usually, but as the mystical agent in the subtle realm. So these two women, Leonora Carrington was English and Remedios Varo was Spanish, V-A-R-O, if you want to look up her incredible work online sometime. They met almost every day to explore their authentic spiritual experience. And often they were joined by the Hungarian photographer Kati Horna and the Swiss photographer Eva Salzer. And they studied tarot and alchemy and theosophy and Kabbalah, and they also shared their dreams and their stories and invented artistic games for further exploration. And Leonora Carrington created her own cosmos, a cosmos with these totemic female figures. Remedios Varo made a large series of art in which a female figure, she's usually in a room, maybe that's a reference to the limitations of the culture, but she's doing something extraordinary. She's doing some extraordinary creativity or scientific discovery with utter nonchalance. And one of my favorite ones is the creation of the birds in 1957. So this figure is sitting at a table, it's nighttime, it's like a tower room, and celestial light is coming through the window and it goes through this kind of Rube Goldberg contraction, and then she's got a prism and the light is onto her table, and then she's painting birds, she's making birds, and then they fly out through the window. And it's just a stunning totality. And I thought, well, birds, creation of birds. Don't women create birds every day with a word or a touch or an insight? Things that are beautiful, things that sing, things that are free. And we do. So I would just like to say that they're an example of how an exploration of authentic, deep spirituality sparked their work in the world. And we, no matter what kind of activism or work we do in the world, also carry within us this presence in our heart-mind of the expansive possibilities of women's spiritual art. Thank you. Okay, now our second speaker, Sadhvi Bhagavati Saraswati, who is with us from India.